So our next speaker comes from Meta, and I'm very excited for this talk because it is about how product managers, how PMs can leverage insights and insights professionals. And there's often a little bit of tension that grows in teams between insights and research and product management. We hate to see it, but sometimes it happens. And this next speaker is uniquely positioned to talk about these challenges and to talk about particularly how to overcome them, because she has been on both sides of the aisle. Started as a UX researcher and is now a director of product at Meta. Can everybody please welcome to the stage Menke Priestley?
Hi everyone, I am Menke, as was just mentioned, and I'm supposed to be here to talk to you today about how PMs should leverage UX research, but I actually want to change the title of my talk, kind of a little last minute, to actually how to have better conversations between product and UX research. Because any good relationship, any good experience comes from having a good conversation at its root. And so that's what I want to spend time talking about today. I know it was just mentioned that the reason I'm here and talking about this is because I've actually lived and worked on both sides of the aisle. For more than 10 years, I was a UX research professional, UX research manager, UX research director at companies big and small, all the way from very small Series A startups to recently working in research at Meta. And about a year and a half ago, I transitioned into product management, which I know a lot of researchers are starting to move into, which is very exciting and I think very appropriate. Because honestly, research and product are very similar. At their root, they're essentially both scientists. You are trying to take a variety of different inputs and figure out how do you create the best, most user-forward product that you can, given the information that you know. And it's a lot about inquiry and trying to figure out how do we make the best thing, how do we understand what user needs are, what the business needs are, and triangulating that all together to create a singular best-in-class product. But unfortunately, there's often tension, which I think is a shame, because you can get so much out of this partnership between product and UX research. I have seen, not out of malintent, but I've seen a lot of product managers underutilize research, misuse research, and I've been a part of a bunch of those relationships and trying to turn those relationships around when I was a UX researcher. Now, as a product partner, I'm trying to have those productive conversations. And so I wanted to share some insights after having actually interviewed, literally, and talked with a bunch of researchers and product people about what do those relationships usually look like, where do they go wrong, and how can we fix them. And there were actually 3 specific conversations that rose to the top in terms of what that normal interaction looks like. And so I want to take those 3 conversations, break them down, and talk about how we can actually transform those into more productive conversations to get more out of that mutual relationship. And the first, which every researcher is probably getting PTSD from at this current moment, is when a product person comes to you and says, that sample size is too small. That is a very common perception, especially when you're thinking about when a product person is looking at qualitative research, because they are often used to data science. They are used to seeing high volumes of output from multiple cuts and ranges and ranges. I work at a company like Meta where you have billions of people using your product every day, week, month, year. And so they are used to having access to so much log data. And what I think sometimes product managers fail to recognize is that these 2 insights functions bring different questions to the table and can help answer different types of things. Data, because it's existing and it's looking at the past, recent past or far past, is really focused on what. What has happened or what has not happened that we thought would happen, and trying to tease apart some of the patterns that we're seeing there. Research, as a lot of the people in the audience know, is a why function in a lot of cases. Especially qualitative research is trying to understand why are we seeing the patterns that we are, and why do we think from our understanding of user needs and their opportunities and their pain points, are they reacting to our hypothesis in the form of a product output in that way? And what I think a lot of product managers in particular fail to understand is that when you're trying to understand the why, you can get there pretty quickly. When you're trying to understand why people are or are not responding to your product, you're getting to that average perspective very, very quickly. And you will see that point of diminishing return and yield that you can get from your insights is actually going to come at 5 interviews of a specific cohort. It's going to come at 10 usability studies. It's going to come, you're going to start to see patterns as to how people answer the question why very, very quickly. And I don't think that this is new information to any of the researchers in the room, but I think that this is something that is sometimes missed or misunderstood in the process of trying to translate between data science and UX research. And so instead of asking, or saying, hey, this is too few, why are we only talking to 8 people? Think about framing your question in a different way. If you're a product person, say, hey, I have a hypothesis and we want to know if we are validating this hypothesis. What is the right sample size or number of people to talk to in order to best understand the answer to that question? And that is where you can have a much more productive conversation with your UX research partner. That often leads to the second type of conversation that we often see as UX researchers, which is, can you do an insert study here or methodology here type of study on this product experience? Getting very, very narrow as to what your expectation is in terms of the type of study and the amount of time it will take and things like that. But usability is one very small piece of the UX researcher's methodological toolkit. And so taking a step back and actually having the conversation and thinking about what kind of information is going to be most helpful for you, product person, to make an informed decision about where you need to go next with your product. Is it attitudinal? Do you want to know what someone's general perspective of your space is? That might lead you to a series of research methodologies like one-on-one interviews or ethnographies if you really want to go in depth. If you want to understand that at scale, a survey might be the right thing for you. If you're trying to understand a behavior, is someone going to do this? Are they going to do that? You're going to end up in a different camp of research methodologies, trying to understand, are they going to interact in a certain way, and understand that in depth. You might end up with a diary study, you might end up with a usability study, something like that. Quantitatively, that's why A/B testing is valuable, because you're understanding that behavior at scale. And you'll have different methodologies depending on where you are in your product development cycle. And I think this sometimes gets misunderstood as well, is when you are early in your product design process, you are going to need deeper answers to your whys. You're probably going to need more attitudinal research. As you get farther along in the product development process towards tactical, hey, how are we building this? Are we building this the right way? All the way through actually evaluating how are we using this product and is it doing what we thought it would? You're going to need different sets of methodologies. And you're going to need different balances of qualitative and quantitative depending on where you are in cycle, as well as the types of questions you have. And so instead of saying, hey, can we do a usability study because that is the only UX research word I know, maybe consider asking and saying, hey, we have these questions, or we need to understand the behavior or the attitude, or I need to understand at a certain scale, either very narrow, very broad. What do you suggest? And work together with them to have a productive conversation and to figure out what is the right balance of approaches here in order to answer at the end of the day, are we headed in the right direction? The third, very, very common question is around time, which is, hey, we're going to go to, we're thinking about starting design, we're going to start coding, we're going to start the next phase of product development next week, next month, whatever it is. What research can we do in that amount of time? As I mentioned earlier, research data collection is bespoke. Every time you have a new why, we have to go and do a new piece of research. Not every time, and I'll talk about some exceptions to that rule. But it is very common for us to need to go and to figure out who are we talking to recruit those people, to do the actual research study, to synthesize that, to pull that together into insights that we hope are actionable, and then to communicate that back out to you. That is a pretty extensive process. And so when you say, we have 1 week, you, product manager, have some options. You can choose, if you do need new research, and you can have that conversation with your partner, you can choose to do something quick, dirty, and fast. You can choose to spend a bunch of money to have someone do something higher quality, but it's going to cost you. Some other techniques that you can do instead, or in addition to talking about what are those options and having that trade-off conversation, is to front load. Is to make sure you have a really great understanding of who are your users, what do they care about, how do we make sure that we are building the right product for them at the beginning. Because once you start down the road of actually building a product, it becomes much more expensive to change it, as you probably have seen. And so making sure that you really understand when it is cheap to change, what do your users want, why are you building the product you are, how can we best serve their needs, and making sure you're doing research, a fair amount of research at that stage, can help you when you get to the point where you need something fast. Because you can work with your researcher to take all of that wonderful data about your user or about similar products you might have tested or similar projects you might have done and distill that down into interpretive insights that where you can kind of infer based on past understanding what is going to be your user's likely response to that project that's going to code next week. And so making sure that you have that robust set of data can really pay off in the long run. The other question, which I actually saw posed in another talk earlier today, is to ask yourself, would I do anything differently if I had research go and answer my question? Now, I know that this is a controversial thing to put out into the world, but this is something that I actually relied on a lot when I was a researcher, especially as a team of 1 or team of 2 at a company, because I would have product managers all the time who were lovely and really wanted to work with research come to me and say, hey, I really want research. I don't know what I need it tomorrow. Literally. Hey, let's do a brand redesign, and you have 3 days to come around and do research. Real time. And so I could, and I busted my butt, and I tried really hard, and I gathered a whole bunch of insights, and I would do this time and time again until I started asking this question and realizing that sometimes, yes, product managers would actually do something differently with the data I had on hand, and sometimes they would not. And so asking this hard question of, would you actually do something differently if we disproved your hypothesis? If we learned from your users that this is actually not something that would serve their need, would you change course? And sometimes you're too far down that development process to actually change course, and that's totally understandable. Maybe you have pressure from the top. There's a lot of reasons why you might not change your mind, but you can save a lot of people time and headache by asking yourself this question. And so whenever you get to the point product person and you're saying, hey, we need insights, I really want them, researchers are so happy to have you say this until you say, hey, we need the insights next week. What you can do instead is you can have this productive conversation, and you have a couple of options and different flavors of things that you can do to try and work with your research partner to come to the right conclusion. If you say, hey, we have a tight timeline, maybe you work with your insights partner to figure out how do we gather, what kind of fidelity are we okay with? Are we okay with something that's quick, dirty, scrappy, and maybe not 100%, perfect? Are we okay with doing that in the timeline that we have? Maybe that's not the right answer. And maybe you did a great job and you have a whole bank of fantastic insights to pull from because you've really front-loaded that research. You have answers to all the questions about who are your users, what do they care about, what do they not care about, how do we build a product that's right for them, so you can glean inferences from the past work that you've done. Or you can ask yourself the very honest reflection question of, would I do anything differently if research disproved my hypothesis tomorrow? And you can use that to move forward. So I've talked about kind of 3 different types of conversations and different ways of changing those. And I think in summary, my recommendations for product people are to involve your research partner early and often. I know this is like the researcher favorite thing to say when you're working with a partner, hey, I would love to be involved early and often, but it really makes a difference. It really does, because it takes so long sometimes to do that really good deep work, and so you need to be able to get ahead, and that will also give you hopefully a better repository that you can pull from in the long run. Share your thinking, product person, as that evolves, because it helps your research team stay ahead and make sure that we're answering the next right why. And you can see from a lot of the ways that I change the conversation, a simple reframe and asking an open-ended question sounds super basic, but can yield much more productive relationships and therefore insights and therefore product development at the end of the day. And we've talked a lot about partnership. Work with your insights partner to make sure that you are understanding what they are suggesting, that you are aligning with their, you're in agreement with their research methodology and how they're doing the approach, so that you will be likely to use those insights at the end of the day. And last but not least, trust your UX research partner. That sounds very basic. It's not. And there is a lot of lack of trust across the industry between these two different scientific at their root functions. And so if you are not in a point of trust of your UX research partner, think about why not. Think about what do you not trust about that, and how you can start to work together to actually get more from each other, because there is so much value to having an insights-backed product strategy. But trust and conversations are a two-way street. So when I was at Meta as a research director, I actually interviewed a bunch of product managers when my team was in a low trust point. I was director over an area, and our product and research functions were not getting along. And so I asked them, I said, hey, why do we have such a low trust bank right now? And so I wanted to share for the researchers in the room, and I could do a whole different talk on this. Some of the suggestions that came from that I am now also seeing as a product person that can help turn around a relationship and help a researcher be more in touch with the product people in the room. And they can do this, and they can start to build trust by understanding the business. I work with so many fantastic, brilliant, PhD level, et cetera, researchers. Very few of them understand the business. If you don't know how your company makes money, who is it beholden to, how are they making decisions, there is no way that your insights are ever going to be fully actionable. Because the business is what drives the product strategy. And yes, hopefully all of your product strategies and your businesses are user-forward and all of that, but without knowing how your business makes money and therefore how it makes decisions, you won't understand how and why the product is changing the way that it is. And so these two fundamental things are often missing from the product or the researcher's toolkit, which makes it really hard to connect to your product partner. The other thing I've noticed, and this might be kind of the groups that I've been a part of, but I've found that often there's a tension between, frankly, performance level incentives and what your team might actually need. In that, a lot of times in UX research functions, you are incentivized from your career standpoint to do strategic research, which has its time and place, as I mentioned before. It's really valuable in certain parts of the life cycle, but sometimes that becomes out your the need of the product team, and your performance might come out of sync. And so I've had to have some pretty hard conversations, actually, even in the last couple of months with various researchers that I work with, of like, hey, I love that you're interested in doing strategic work, but right now, our product team needs like round after round of concept testing, usability, you name it, eye tracking, whatever it is. And it's not the time and the place for doing big strategic work. We have a lot of that. And so making sure that you hit that right balance is incredibly important. Partner with your product person, and this goes both ways. Partnership is a two-way street, but work with them to make sure what you are doing is in line with what they want and need at the end of the day. if I had $1 for every time a product person got to the end of an insight or end of a round of research, saw the insights, and said, that's not what I needed, I would be a very rich person. Because you often end up somehow getting out of sync with what the product person actually wants, or you're not speaking the same language, and so you end up doing a whole bunch of really great, wonderful research and gathering all these insights that your product person was never going to use in the first place. And it's very easy for product managers to nod and say, yeah, sure, that looks good. And so that's on the product managers to make sure that they are actively engaged in developing that work. But making sure you're trying to partner is incredibly important. And the last thing is to make your insights actionable. You can only do that if you understand the business and the product strategy and you're collecting the right data. But making sure that you are thinking about what would I do as the research person now that I know these insights? How would I suggest we change our product strategy? And that's a totally reasonable thing to have an opinion on. I think there's often a meme in research and insights functions that having opinions is taboo, but I actually think that's your biggest superpower. And so what I wanted to leave you with is after you do all of these wonderful things and you are trying to build trust and having better conversations, I'm sure a lot of people in the room are wondering, how will I know if we've gotten to the right point? How do we know if we're in a good, successful, powerful relationship between insights and product? And I want to leave you with this question. Because to me, this is the question that gives me signal about whether or not you and your product partner, your research and product partners, are in sync. If you were queen or king of the world, what would you do? I asked myself this as a researcher almost every single quarter at a minimum, and that is how I became a product manager, was asking myself, when I have this huge bank of insights, what would I do with the product strategy? What would I do? What would I build? And if you are not able to, as a product person, ask your researcher this question and feel confident and interested in the result, or if you as a researcher are not able to answer this question yourself and feel confident in presenting that to a product person, you've still got work to do. Because once you can ask this question of your researcher and have them come up with a product strategy that is insights informed, you still have opportunity left on the table. So thank you all for your time today. I hope you have better conversations moving forward.
Thank you very much. We have time for one question.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so from the chat, and I will paraphrase, product management has gone through its fair share of turbulence in the last year or so, even if only anecdotally. So the question is, what is your experience at Meta of product management? How has this sort of shifted over the last year? And what are the traits of highly successful product managers at Meta and in general?
That is a very loaded question, so I might only answer a fraction of that. I think I got a really interesting piece of advice from my former manager as I became a product director, which was that product managers at their root are writers. They are responsible for gathering in a whole bunch of different inputs and telling the story of what we are going to do with the product from that. And so I think that that's actually the make or break in my perspective, is how good a product manager is at storytelling. Because you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't sell that to someone, if you can't say, this is what we need to do and why, you're gonna have a very hard time building a product. So that would be my answer.
Let's give it up for Claire.
Thank you all.